call to order the Morrisville Town Council work session dated November 13th, 2018. It's 5:32 p.m. We are here tonight to discuss the continued work session to discuss the resolution to adopt the Comprehensive Transportation Plan update. At this time, I'm going to pass it to Courtney Tanner.
Good evening. A couple of quick items. You'll notice there's 4 sections with the presentation this evening. The first is the adoption schedule. The next is kind of an overview of what we accomplished to date. Then we're going to have another overview, basically the same process we started before, picking up with Chapter 4. And then all those items that we parked are basically the 4th section of here. I am not going to go over in detail what we accomplished to date. I'm going to quickly cover the schedule, and then I'm going to move on to really the meat of Chapter 4. So first, schedule. The last work session, this is the schedule that was included in the presentation. I am recommending updating it due to our current schedule and where we've made progress to date. So my recommendation is to no longer close the online portal that's available on the web page until such time that we've accomplished going through all of the chapters, all of the appendices, and all substantive guidance for recommended changes has been provided by the board. Once that occurs, the following Monday at 7 a.m., we will go ahead and shut down the portal. How does the board feel about that recommended change to the portal timeline?
I think that is appropriate since we haven't really agreed on all the terms. However, I would ask, how are we to receive that feedback as a council?
As we've been updating the attachment with all the comments, we'll take whatever's received by that deadline and update it. Like, there is technically a new version in your current packet, just no new comments. We simply updated the date. Any new comments will be added. If there's still no comments received, we'll just continue to update the date like we have. Not proposing any changes to that process if the board was satisfied with that.
Okay, so anyone else? Councilmember Johnson?
I was just going to say I agree. I think we need to leave it open while council is still discussing and making potential changes. So yes, I agree with the
Councilmember Garamella?
Can't tell you. If we, for example, were able to get through and discuss every appendices in every chapter by the November 27th meeting, it would be the Monday following that meeting. We're still shooting for action on December the 11th. I did not make a change to that. I simply was recommending only a change to the timeline for shutting down the portal.
Okay, I agree as well. So it sounds like you have consensus to keep that schedule until we change it if we choose to.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead now and move ahead to Chapter 4. In your slide, I'm going to go through all the guidance there. You can take a look at it. If you have any questions, please reach out to me directly or to Ben. But I'm going to go ahead and move forward, starting with Chapter 4. And I'm actually going to turn it back over to Ben so he can provide an overview, and then I will touch base on all the follow-up items.
So, good evening. Chapter 4 covers the bicycle, pedestrian, and transit recommendations of the plan. As you'll see on this slide, these are some of the bicycle network recommendations. For the bicycle network, Chapter 4 focused on-street recommendations and has specifications for both bike lanes and sharrows, which you'll see there on the screen. And then for the pedestrian facilities, we have used the new term, the multi-use path network, or side path is our new term. And that focuses on both what we call on and off-street recommendations. Off-street recommendations primarily being greenways, on-street primarily being multi-use paths and side paths, which are wider sidewalks. And again, as you see here, and we also have a new type of facility that we're calling a greenway connector. That can be anything from a greenway to a sidewalk that connects the existing on-street facility to a greenway. And you see pictures at the bottom of the slide again for those. We also discussed the transit network in Chapter 4, and it provides an overview of the existing and proposed transit service provided by or funded by Wake Transit. It does not specifically recommend any local service routes. Again, it does recommend to do a transit study, which we have now released the request for qualifications for late last week, and should be getting those in within the next month or so. So we're actually running a little bit ahead of this plan. And so hopefully once this plan is adopted, we'll already be into one of the major recommendations out of this plan. Changes from the 2009 plan included updated on-road bicycle infrastructure recommendations. We updated our bicycle lane guidance and also provided some better guidance for shared lane markings than was in our 2009 plan. We also updated our off-road pedestrian infrastructure recommendations, including integrating greenways into this plan. And then we also have the side paths that now with some different widths recommended for those. We also updated our transit recommendations to match the Wake Transit Plan proposed regional transit network for both the regional bus service and the regional commuter rail service. Again, we recommended future study for the, or additional study for future local service, and it does recommend consideration of additional TOD site at Wake Tech.
Okay, moving on to the items that were part from previous work sessions. First one is to consider adding additional background on Wake Transit community funding areas. Currently, the information is located on pages 4-6 and 4-7. If Ben, you could turn to those pages of the plan, please. Please note that we did not include the community funding areas in Table 5.1, and that is because that source of funding came directly out of the Blue Ribbon Commission report, and so that's why it's not included there. Instead, rather, it was provided on, again, page 4.6 and 4.7. So I just need feedback whether or not what we've provided is adequate or if additional information is needed to the plan.
I'll jump in there if you
Councilmember
want.
Johnson?
I know this whole chapter is going to change when, we do go through our transit study, and so I'm kind of okay with where we're at right now. I mean, unless there's any other suggestions, I think this chapter will be enhanced as we move forward with the transit study, so I'm okay with it as it is right now. I don't know if that's the feedback you're looking for.
Councilmember Johnson? Scroggins Johnson.
It's Vicki. It's much easier. Very good. So the chapter 4, with the transit options and so forth, like Councilmember Johnson said, it's going to be rather fluid. If in the next year we talk more about getting some bus routes in the town or identifying stops and so forth like that. Is there a way to, also think about putting some specific transit stuff into the appendix section more? Because it's like, I always think of the body of this document being more stable and the appendices being the one area where we have more dynamic information that will be less burdensome on the whole document. So this may not work in this area for Chapter 4 because of the very nature of our topic, but I just wanted to, if you wanted to simplify the structure in the future, just don't have to answer, but just a suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Wendell, then Councilmember Garamella, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I was reviewing, one of the things that really stood out to me too, and I think we're kind of going on the same page here, is looking at the document proper as the infrastructure, the
Scaffolding.
the scaffolding, if you will, so that there's something that every time something changes, you don't have to go through the entire thing. There's the kind of the basis of what we want in the plan. But I do like the idea when we have, something that is variable to have that in the appendices, because you can always go refer right back. And maybe within the document where we know that there are potential to have variances, you could be asterisks to refer back, which I think we do anyway, to refer to appendices, and that's where we can make changes. I know that once I start reading, to look for a change, to have to go all the way back through the whole thing and try to figure out where it was, it can get very cumbersome. So I like the idea.
Councilmember Garamella, please, and then Councilmember Schlenk.
Benjamin, in this particular picture, I see NC State, you have both the commuter rail and also, the rapid go transit. When it comes to Morrisville, the way it is aligned, you have the rail, but the go triangle going to RDU. Is there inner circulator loops that basically connect from the rail to RDU?
Yeah, this picture is actually right out of the Wake Transit plan, and it's their connecting regional picture, so it purposefully was a lot more vague and was purposefully meant to only show the major regional service, which is the commuter rail, and it's actually regional bus service, and then the new light rail between Chapel Hill and Durham. So that's why that picture is like that. There are other maps out of the Wake Transit plan that do show additional service, and actually if you go to the last page of chapter 4, we do have the bigger map that does show some of those on their bus services in town.
Councilmember Schlenk, please.
Yes, Mines. I kind of agree that since we're going to do the transportation, the public transportation study, I had questions about how that's going to fit in with this. Do we have to do an amendment to it, or is it slip right in? And then I have a couple more questions after you answer that about the plan itself.
So for that, we haven't really had a whole lot of discussion about that yet. I think that is certainly going to be a point for discussion and decision by council. If you want to, the public transportation study is really going to be providing us the data that we need to determine what, if any, additional local transit service should be provided in Morrisville, what that should look like, what kind of service, whether it's some sort of Lyft or Uber subsidy versus a local circulator versus something else. And then I think once we have that data from the study, staff can work with the council to integrate something into the transportation plan that would be based off of that study. The study itself is going to be more of providing the data and the backbone for an ultimately a recommendation of how to provide additional transit service in town.
Okay, so that's and I guess the backbone of that is the RFQ that we got the other day. Okay,
Yes.
So in there we're talking about financial projections, 5-year plans, provide funding options.
Yes.
Does that include commuter rail, commuter transit, or whatever we're going to call it?
No, for our study's really going to focus on Morrisville specific and local service. The commuter rail is funded out of the Wake Transit plan as a regional service. So we as Morrisville don't really have to worry about any funding for that. The funding projections that are going to be coming out of the study will be for a Morrisville specific service, whatever we decide that to be and whatever the data leads us to.
Okay, I get that, but how about the commuter rail station? Who's going to pay for that?
That'll be funded by Wake Transit as part of the commuter rail project. That there is money set aside in the funding model for the Wake Transit plan to cover not only the commuter rail itself, but also stations and other infrastructure that'll be needed.
Okay, just one more question on that, because I'm very concerned with that. That will be like the library that we're going through now, where they're going to give us a budget and say, this is what we're going to offer you.
There has not been enough discussion about commuter rail at this point to for me to be able to answer that question. In Wake Transit, we are just now getting to the point of actually deciding on a project sponsor for commuter rail, and all of those details will come in once we've designated a project sponsor and get into more detail with project development.
And then just two more things, sorry. Back to piggyback off the RDU. I'd be interested in that one. That should be part of the funding structure, right? The fees and everything else?
Say that one more time, sorry.
RDU, where they would maybe rotate I think that in discussions they've talked about rotating people from the transit, commuter transit or buses out of Morrisville to the airport.
And there is bus transit proposed in Wake Transit that would connect out to RDU.
And what we're talking about. Then one other thing, do we need to put in other transit stops, commuter transit stops? I think one was brought up at our last meeting.
That's certainly something the council could look at. Again, the Wake Transit, the broader commuter rail transit project has not gotten to the level of designating specific stops yet, but there are some broad guidelines that are being used. One of which is that if you can't have stop spaced too closely together because you're essentially using a modified freight train or like an Amtrak train, and it takes so long for those to get up to speed and then slow down. If you put stops too close together, you won't see any improvement in travel time because the train's always going to be speeding up just to slow down. So the stop we currently have designated at the TOD has been and is what is seen as the primary stop for Morrisville. The only other area that they've talked about so far in the Wake Transit effort as being a potential commuter rail stop would be down around Park Place Shopping Center at Cary Parkway, James Jackson area. And that's again due to spacing. It's depending on where exactly the stop would be. Part of that area is in Morrisville, part of it's in Cary. It's right at our border of our jurisdictions.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we would just be interested in the results of that study and how that would impact and whether or not it's going to be in the meat of the our transportation plan going forward, or it's part of an appendix. So I guess that's the direction that you have at this point, and we're just sort of waiting to see what comes of it.
So just so I completely am on the same page, we're going to leave, minus any other changes that have come out from our further discussion, basically leave it as is, and we will revisit it and decide what's most appropriate. The appendices, either appendix or appendices, depending on what comes of that process, and what's most appropriate actually in the body of Chapter 4. And for example, I think, probably the maps related to the Greenway and stuff like that, most appropriate, but the other stuff may be able to be moved to the appropriate appendix, which would be a new one. Is everybody... Seems to be the general direction. As is, fine. We'll revisit when we have more substantive information.
And I think Councilmember Schlenk had another thought.
I agree with all that. I had a question about just if we're moving forward on Chapter 4.
We're still on Chapter 4, I believe. Yeah.
Yes, I have questions 2 through 5 that still need to be covered. If they're not one of those at the end, and if it quickly can be answered, great. If not, I'd ask that we park them like we have before, and I'll bring it back at a future meeting. So question number 2 is discuss adding a new emergency access connection between Morrisville Carpenter Road and Crabtree Crossing Parkway. This was brought up at one of the previous meetings, and it was related to, for removing the roadway, should we consider an emergency access only road? So I'll turn that over for discussion.
Councilmember Wendell, and then Councilmember Schlenk, please.
Yeah, so I think that, when we're looking at safety in general and access through, from a safety perspective for any community, and at the rate at which, the town is expanding, I certainly would like to see that similar to what we did over at Millicent and Little. I think that, being able to use an access like that as part of the greenway system, part of a walkway system, with having some type of a blockade, if you will, that would not allow a rambunctious teenager to take their truck and, shoot across it. But certainly that would be able to support an emergency vehicle is very much in keeping with, I think, the direction that council has gone to really have that type of access across our organization. So I would be very much in favor of that. It doesn't seem like anything that would be untoward.
Councilmember Schling, please.
Much like my comments about Millicent, I think the neighborhood needs input, and I believe that as we were going to discuss Millicent, that still hasn't been decided, and I think the latest vision is that staff was recommending that it not even be included as part of an emergency access. So, as an option. So that's all. I think it would be best to discuss Millicent first, because a lot of that carries over, for me at least, and I think has to do a lot with cost. And then I know when we talk about emergency access, that the fire department in a briefing that they gave us indicated they didn't think this was necessary if they're going to move a fire station over there.
I thought that we already gave direction about Millicent.
That is correct. The guidance provided by council at a previous work session, and we are now internally, staff level, just so if you hear me use the term, we're referring to it as the Breckenridge Greenway Loop. The decision was made to convert what was shown previously as a road on the adopted plan and the draft plan, convert that to an emergency access. It will look like a greenway. It will feel like a greenway. It's just designed to support the weight of emergency access vehicles. And then the greenway would extend on the south side of the south side of Level and connect up to Davis, creating a loop that will connect Parkside Elementary, the future school site potentially, and just create a loop amenity for the neighborhood. That was the general consensus of the council. But
then you had 4 options. Most recently, I think you put them on there, and for action for town council, and one of the options is not to include anything. Option 4.
That is correct. We did present several options, and at that specific meeting, when I presented those options, the agreement was to move forward with a loop with the emergency connection. So the options, just again, quickly reminder, was basically emergency only, no little, greenway only, no little, emergency plus little, and then greenway plus little or nothing at all. So there were 5 options that I presented based off the various comments that I had provided to date. And again, the decision was emergency plus little.
Okay, if that's fine, but I'll just bring it up again. I don't think, back to Millicent, that the questions I have is, I'm just trying to understand staff logic. We know that we can't make a developer do off-site improvements. So your recommendation is to build a greenway on the one side of the road. The town will spend money to build a sidewalk that would connect it to E50. And there's a greenway on the other side of the road. This is just a greenway connection. That's what the neighborhood wants. They don't want a connection to the school. And if that's the logic, that we have a connection to the school, then why don't we just move the greenway to the backside of E50 school so that people could use the greenway going to the school to get to the greenway? And I would think that would be appropriate. I think so. We're currently discussing that with Wake County. Why not just ask them for, coming out of the front of their property, that they do a flashing light and do a crossing so we could get across the street. But I think you could do that at Millicent too, because we do that down Morrisville Carpenter at 3 different points. We do it at Evans Road, where we just put in the Crabtree Crossing extension, which is, I think those cars go 35, if not 45 through there. And other couple locations that we'll probably do up along the McCrimmon's extension. So I apologize to my colleagues, but I didn't think it was a done deal. But again, I don't think it was very well. I think we still need to vet it like we do on, if we're going to continue with Crabtree Crossing, to put in some other parameters in there. Is it necessary, and how much would it cost before we proceed with those options?
Well, I think as part of the process in the future, we'll have an opportunity to weigh in, but I think we sort of have made that decision in the past. Does anyone else want to respond to that, or should we? Mayor Pro Tem Scroggins-Johnson?
So during our work session, we were covering several topics, and we took straw polls instead of motions. And all of this is on video, so I'm sure we could look at this in detail if we wished. But it's my understanding that we did have a straw poll on the Millicent connection with the modification to support emergency vehicles. I understand Councilmember Schling's concern about the Parkside Elementary connections and whether or not there are signalized crosswalks or on-demand crosswalks, but we never discussed that. The only thing we discussed and supported was the greenway access with emergency vehicles. Now, if we want more information about the E50 and stuff, I would ask that we bring that back to another work session with maps, because I don't live in Breckenridge, as many other council members do not, and I would like the opportunity to look at that suggestion and walk the property if possible. Now, related to the Crabtree Crossing, that also had a straw poll. We did not have a motion. If we're going to accept the Millicent Greenway connection with the process that we established last time, we would do the Crabtree Crossing Road that we talked about. However, now we are addressing a Greenway connection for Crabtree Crossing with the ability to support emergency vehicles. Now, we could put supportive language that could only be used when the roadways were not ideal, because we get 5 o'clock traffic and 9 a.m. traffic along that roadway all the time, where it becomes a logjam, and emergency vehicles have a very difficult time getting around those roads. So having a greenway that could support emergency vehicles because of times of day or in case of accidents, that would be a suitable option in my opinion.
Councilmember Wendell and then Councilmember Johnson, please.
Yeah, I agree. When we're looking at either one, from a budgetary perspective, I don't think we're there yet to say put a RFP out to find out exactly what it's going to cost. But more importantly, I think from a transportation plan perspective, to provide as many possible options from a public safety perspective, I think you just can't go wrong with that. I agree that we need additional fire stations. I think our fire chief in the presentation indicated that we needed additional fire stations as well. But we can't count on what's going to happen necessarily in the future to be able to have a protectorate for our community. And I think also, as I'm thinking about it, it's not just residences. If we had a fire station up by Park West somewhere. I don't even know where the land would be to build one, but let's say that we did. But right down the way over here, there was a major traffic accident. The ability to get from one to the other, to have options that could save a life, just seems like a very, very positive leadership move, and I think it does show good leadership judgment and future planning, because it takes one life. You can save one life, it's worth it. And so it's not just the residents on the far side of Morrisville, but it really is this central core. And frankly, when you consider, it goes back to my point with the downtown, with the congestion that we're going to have downtown, it might not be such a bad idea to have another potential access for an emergency vehicle, and especially because it could be used as the greenway also. I mean, it really is the best of both worlds.
Councilmember Johnson, then Councilmember Garamella, please.
So just getting back to the Millicent, we did talk about that as a council, and we did decide to make it emergency access, and we talked about the loop as Courtney just talked about, so I'm not going to repeat everything Jerry said, but or Vicky, but I agree with their comments. As far as funding goes, I agree. We're not ready to fund that walking loop that will go down Little and then connect back Davis and back into Breckenridge. I think that's for the future council to decide, and potentially there'll be some funding mechanisms to use. And so I'm not, as we talked about, this plan is not based on funding. This plan is based on what we would potentially hope to see in the future. And as funding comes available, these pieces of infrastructure will be developed or changed if need be in the future as the community changes. So as far as I'm concerned, we're done with the Millicent topic. And as far as the Crabtree Crossing, I too am very concerned about emergency access, and I would be in favor of putting this on a plan for the future council, again, to figure out if it's feasible, if it's fundable, but to at least have this option for public safety access. And then the last thing I'll just say is our fire department never said that either of these connections was not recommended. All we heard from them was a fire study, and in that study, they talked about multiple solutions that are important for this community into the future. And building future fire stations was one, but connectivity was a important issue that came out of that study as well.
Councilmember Garamella, please.
My recollection when John Dawson, DA, talked about the fire study, and I very specifically asked him a question. Do you anticipate when we complete all those roads, do you still need a new fire station, or will this help enhance these areas? And he very clearly said that no, it would not. And it, we on the priority list, he said Park West would be the first. That was my understanding. We can roll back and look. That's exactly what I asked him for. So for me, it is, let's take a priority of making Park West a fire station. Around that, how we find it as part of the staff to look into it and get back to us. But that is the key area, because to make sure it's the same issue for Cary and same issue for Morrisville. So we need to address that issue first.
Councilmember Schlink beat you by a nose, and then Councilmember Wendell.
I know that when the plan first came to us, we talked about putting things on as an option for possible discussion. This might be one where I would agree, again, emergency access connection, not an emergency access road. I think I heard a council member indicate that they felt that if there was a backup or an accident, that this could be opened up for a road, and I think that's, well, that's what I heard. But anyhow, I think, again...
Well, just a second, I want to be clear, I don't think anyone else heard it that way.
No, it was emergency vehicles only.
So, just to be clear...
Then you said if there was an accident, but you used the word road. The only thing I'm trying to say is we have to be very sensitive.
Accident on the road.
Okay. Can I just, can I have a moment, please?
I don't think I've given it up. I don't think I've given up the...
No, I'm going to come right back to you, sir. I just want to say that I believe that, I don't want to speak for what someone spoke earlier, but it was my impression that it was said that if there's an accident on a road, that the Crabtree Crossing Greenway safety enhanced would be able to be used for emergency vehicles only. So I just want to be clear that I think that's what most of us heard, and then I'd love to hear the rest of your point.
What I'm trying to pass along is I think this is a very sensitive issue to a lot of people in that neighborhood, and I think when we start to use road and accidents and opening it up for things that you're going to highlight things that I don't think we want to open up again. But for the sake of compromise, as with Millicent, I think that both of these emergency access connections need further study, and I think they can always be brought back on. But again, I think there's enough understanding, at least with Crabtree Crossing, going back to the 2004 bond referendum where they estimated it was going to cost $3.5 million to build a road, you're going to find that I think it's going to cost the same to build a road as it were to emergency access connection because, again, you're dealing with very heavy equipment trying to go across. But I would just recommend, again, that this could be put on for further discussion, but nothing agreed to or anything like that. Otherwise, I think we have to, it's a new thing that the public was never informed about, nor P&Z.
Okay, so that might be one of the options when we come to try to gather a consensus, but we'll continue the discussion for now. Councilmember Wendell, then Mayor Pro Tem, then Councilmember Johnson, then Garamella, please.
So I think this is a good opportunity to do what we've failed to do before, which is, what are the pros and cons? What is good and what is bad? So we're not looking at funding. We're not looking at trying to fund anything as we sit here today. So, if you had a pros and cons list and you said, what are the pros of having emergency vehicle access? You could potentially save lives. You have a greenway. Emergency vehicles could get from point A to point B if needed in a much more rapid way from a response perspective. And then you look, what are the cons? I can't think of one reason why a board would not want to provide emergency access. Take funding out of it. It could cost $20 billion. We're not talking about funding, but the idea of being able to provide emergency access, irrespective of the building of a fire station. So I get, we want to build a fire station. We want to build probably 5 or 6 of them. But looking specifically at an emergency exit or emergency access from point A to point B, I would like to hear from my colleagues, what are the negatives of that piece? And I don't mean that we don't want public input at all, but just from a planning perspective, what are the negatives for saying, that is a good place to be able to potentially have emergency access. We're not talking about, building a gigantic something. We're talking about emergency access. So I think if we could have some dialogue on the pros and cons rather than just what our personal positions are, it would help even me to say, yeah, maybe we don't need it. And the last thing I'll say is, we were given a brief by the fire department, but that we were given a brief to tell us, where there were missing elements or where there can be improvements, isn't a proclamation of what should or should not be. It's a briefing, just like we get information from any other source. So staff recommends, X, we take that into consideration. So I would like to be able to have a little bit of just dialogue instead of just positioning if we could.
I understand completely. We have 5 minutes left. I don't think we're going to resolve this one at this time. Do we want to hear a few more and then finish up this part, and we'll continue this in the second half of our work session? Does that sound? If it's not too late. So Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilmember Johnson. And Satish put his down.
So I'd like to extend the pros and cons discussion, if we could. With a greenway that has more robust support for heavyweight vehicles, there obviously could be, for medical purposes, better response time if the current roadways would delay that kind of thing. There's also the possibility of fire that would allow the emergency responders to respond in a more timely way or to have better access to the site that might have an urgent situation. I live in Savannah, and that has an emergency access greenway as well as a main access point. It only has one road to the side of the south of Morrisville Carpenter Road with the emergency access, and that emergency access has not been used either more than once because of the fact that it has not been needed. But as the increase of traffic happens, I can't say if that would ever be needed unless there was a fire or a medical response that could not be accessed another way. So the probability is not known. It needs to be studied. That is neither a pro nor a con, but there needs to be more study about it. But I think there is only positive reasons to consider this type of greenway.
Councilmember Johnson, please.
So I think it's I think we're getting a little confused here, and it's really important to reiterate again: we are not talking about a road at Crabtree Crossing. That decision has been made. There will not be a road connection. There will not be a Crabtree Crossing extension. I think what we're talking about, well, I know what we're talking about here tonight is a greenway connection and whether it should have emergency vehicle ability for emergency vehicles to use in times when it's appropriate. And that's it only. So my comments are solely based on that it's a greenway with some kind of emergency vehicle access. Our fire department never said that was inappropriate. They never weighed in on that being unnecessary. So I want to make that clear, that when I made my comments about 25 minutes ago, it was on the greenway connection with emergency access. So no staff member has said that's not necessary. I mean, I think it's up to us to decide whether we think that's necessary or not. But I agree, we're not going to finish this discussion. And I agree, the pros and cons are important. I don't know what the negatives are. I need to think about that. So I think that's an important discussion to have.
Councilmember Schlink?
And again, just quickly, but it's environmentally sensitive wetlands it's going through, and that's back to price. And if we looked at, we have taken things off already off this current plan that were added back in 2009 because of price and cost. And we did, and the council back then did it in 2009 also. We're doing it here in 2019 if this thing gets done next year versus this year.
At this point, it's 6:14. We'll hopefully continue this later this evening. It's on the agenda. We'll see if the timing allows it. Otherwise, we'll revisit this as the first item the next time we meet on this subject. I would entertain a motion to adjourn this work session.
To adjourn the work session?
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, it is 6:14. We are adjourned. At 6:30, we'll be meeting for our regular meeting. Thank you all very much.